Hey everyone, welcome to another edition of PowerCore Productions and Podcastings. I'm your host, Ron Harrington, back to hit you with another video. And today we are here for the series finale of What If Deku Was Iron Man, My Hero Academia Armored Adventures Part 9. But as always, if you're a fan of the channel and everything else that we have to offer, then please don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, share, and hit that bell for post notifications so you can stay up to date on everything that is PowerCore Productions and Podcastings that's to come out now and in the future. As we enter into the finale of this series, before we get into the major crossover, that being in the Multiverse of Madness, I always like to take the time at the end of a series to say thank you to everyone who has enjoyed the story, who's been along for the ride. I know that some stories are more popular than others, but all the same, it feels good when you're able to get one to completion. The ending, I kind of wish there was a bit more that I could have done. I'll even be the first to admit I probably didn't flesh out the Mandarin as big of a character as I could, but honestly, he was really just a villain for the final battle anyway, so there really wasn't that much more that I wanted to add to him. Also, in terms of will this series continue on, I am leaving wiggle room so that if I want to continue the series, I can. But if I don't get around to it, then, at least it will have a ending of sorts, I'm just leaving the door open so that I can come back to it one day if I want to. After the crossover events for the anime Power Rangers series and the anime Marvel series, I'm going to take a brief break, and when we come back with newer stories, we're kind of try to cut back on the multiverse, kind of crossover events. Not that I didn't like doing it, as we go into July, actually, we're reaching the 1-year anniversary of when our multiverse began with the series What If Spider-Man Was in ReZero. That was basically what started this whole Multiverse of Madness storyline to begin with. But all the same, trying to make all the stories connect, it takes a lot to plan ahead of time. And with the two multiverse stories that we have going now, those are kind of like my big crowning achievements for the channel as a whole. So after we finish our main crossover stories, we're just going to be dialing things back a little bit. So that's just something to keep in mind going forward. But all in all, thank you for your support with the channel, with this series. As always, I can't do it without you. You make the channel grow, you make the core grow. So now, as always, sit back, relax, and enjoy as we reach the conclusion of What If Deku Was Iron Man? My Hero Academia Armored Adventures, Part 9. All Might powered up to his most strongest form. All for One manifested his quirks, and the black armored Mandarin, with only 5 of the 10 Makuon rings at his disposal, channeled his chi in preparation for battle. The 5 rings that the Mandarin had, each had a unique and special power, as they all did. There was the purple ring, the ring of teleportation. There was the blue ring, the ring of water manipulation. There was also the orange ring, a ring that could emit an acid cloud, capable of melting through and eating away at almost any material. There was also the crimson ring, that allowed him clairvoyance, as well as mental projection, and even mind control to a certain extent. And finally, there was the black ring, the ring that could control a dark force of power. These rings in and of themselves were truly unique in nature, powerful and strong over a particular element, elements that he had become all too familiar with. The buffed and powered All Might would go in for the first strike against All For One manifesting the many array of his quirks, creating a shield to protect himself out of debris. The Mandarin would come striking next, as he delivered a roundhouse kick to All Might's left side. All Might lifting his massive arms, he would block the attack. However, the Mandarin would fade to the right side himself, delivering a low punch to his gut, causing him to fall back a bit. However, All Might would not falter, as he delivered a right hook to the Mandarin's face, some of his armor actually beginning to crack. This actually impressed him some. The Mandarin had to use his own chi to amplify his strength and defense just to withstand All Might's massive attack. But, all the same, as the three forces collided, they were able to see that they were definitely forces to be reckoned with, and that this three-way dance could be in the fate of the world. As for Deku and the others, they made their way over to where the League of Villains were. Shigaraki and his forces fighting against Shang-Chi and Bakugo, who were holding their own as best as they could. Deku, without hesitation, would come flying in, a streak of red and gold streaking across the clouds. This new armor series that he had created, one of which that he believed was his strongest armor to date, it took into effect all of the fights that he had had up until now. Carrying a black box on his back, Deku would come flying in with repulsor rays, creating space for Shang-Chi and Bakugo to make room. As the others came in for the assistance, Melissa, using her Pym particles, would shrink. She had created for herself a special tool to use in her hero work. They were mechanical drones. They were tiny in nature, but they could pack a punch. They drew their power from one of the 10 Makuan rings that Melissa had been charged with protecting, the Ring of Life. There would be a small pulse in the stingers that would give off a strong shock. Melissa would command this very horde of wasps, similar to how their fellow students in UA, who were capable of using their voice to control animals. As Deku and the others went in for the assistance, Todoroki, who was wearing the ice ring and the flame ring that he had been entrusted by Shang-Chi, he figured that now, if there was anyone capable of drawing out their powers, then it was him. As he used both the rings combined in nature, the fire and the ice, he would create a massive wall blocking off the two sides, while Deku approached Shang-Chi and Bakugo to see how they were doing. Bakugo would curse out Deku. However, he did have a grin on his face, as he was pleased to see that his backup had finally arrived. And not too far behind, Shinso, along with T'Challa, would arrive as well. They confirmed that Izuku's mother was safe, and with that they had now all gathered together. Bakugo was saved, and it meant that now it was time for them to get out of there. However, Shang and Deku made it very clear that they weren't leaving. They couldn't. For Shang, this was a chance to deal with his father once and for all. And for Deku, this was about revenge. The man that murdered his father all those years ago, who put his family through so much. His father entrusted him with the power ring for a reason. Momo stood beside Deku. She wasn't going to leave now. She had full confidence in him, but this was also her fight as well, as her mentor in All Might was battling against his nemesis All For One, and she had been entrusted with the quirk of One for All, meaning this was just as much her fight as anyone else's. Todoroki, he didn't plan on going anywhere. Neither did T'Challa, or Melissa, or Shinso. Knowing that they weren't going to leave, Deku would simply nod. Shinso would remark that it seemed as though they had a little team going. They should give it a name someday. What should they call themselves? Bakugo would tease. Although he wasn't much of a team player, the idea of putting together a superhero team did sound pretty sweet. Deku told them that they could come up with a name later, but for now there was more important business. Deku would sit down the big metallical black box and placed it in front of Bakugo. He would tell Bakugo that he had made this for him. If he wanted to use it, it was up to him. It was his choice. Bakugo asked what it was, and Deku explained that maybe he couldn't use the name King Lord Explosion Murder, but he had thought of one that fit Bakugo perfectly. The box would open on its own. It looked like a suit, similar to Izuku's, although instead of it being gold and red, it was instead silver and black. It was similar to the briefcase suit that Izuku used, his silver Centurion armor. That was what it was based on. There were two large black cubes, one to the left and one to the right, as well as the main cube in the middle that was the armor itself. Bakugo put his hands in the left and right side. Locking in immediately, a scanner would register Bakugo as the owner of the armor. As Bakugo lifted both of his arms, he would see that on both of his wrists were grenade gauntlets, just like the ones that he used, except they were all black with silver trim, as the rest of the armor formed around him. His armor was a little more bulkier than Deku's. It had a gauntlet gun on his right shoulder, as well as a mini rocket launcher on its left. Bakugo could see that this thing was definitely made for explosions. As he now donned his suit of armor, he asked what was the name of it, and Deku, he simply grinned as he said, "It's called the War Machine, Model 1. War Machine, Bakugo said with a smirk. I like the sound of that. As the heroes were now suited up, rearing to go and ready for battle, Deku stood in front of them as they looked to follow his lead. Was he the leader of some hero team now? He wasn't really sure. Was he some great new futuristic hero? One that was going to lead the world into the future? Deku had no idea of that either. To be honest, he had no idea how this battle was going to end, but one way or another, this would be its final chapter. Deku led the charge as the others followed close behind. All Might had been knocked back to the ground by the Mandarin, who had managed to blast him away with a pure beam of energy. That was before All for One could come in with a strike of his own against the tyrant. As they managed to get back to their feet though, they would hear a loud rain of explosions. Bakugo in his War Machine armor, and Deku as well, with the power ring amplifying his strength to its highest degree. The two of them would combine an all-out assault against the Mandarin, blasting him in the chest and knocking him far away. Momo would come flying in as well. Using her specially made nanites, she would create a robotic arm encasing her own, enhanced with overdrive at 30%. Her enhanced strength of a punch would come flying in, crashing into All for One. As All Might got back on his feet, Gran Torino following close behind. Both heroes watch as the children now entered the fray. T'Challa almost running on all fours, using the power of the electromagnetic lightning ring to enhance his speed, moved like a violet blur on the battlefield as he went scratching and charging straight towards the Mandarin. Melissa would use her drones, a wasp as well, to fight and attack from a distance, while Todoroki, with the ice ring and the flame ring in each hand, would shoot massive columns of both fire and ice at the same time, the rings working to offset his body's temperature and keep him in check. Shinso, from a distance, would fire his arrows at a precise time. Of course, in the grand scheme of things, he wasn't expecting to get a hit, but at the very least, he could stun the enemy long enough to keep them on their toes. All Might, as he rose once more, would yell at the students to get out of here, telling them that this wasn't their fight, and that this wasn't where they needed to be. However, they would turn back to All Might and explain that this indeed was where they needed to be right now. The future of the world and everyone in it couldn't just be in the hands of one person. These were the kind of fights that no one hero could win alone. These were the battles where heroes had to stand together to fight the battles that regular people never could. As Deku stood tall and proud amongst them, the Mandarin coming back to his feet, he eyed at both his son and at Deku. Well, if it isn't the prodigal son making his return. And it seems you've made some friends, Shang. I'm glad you're so pleased, Father. I hope there's no hard feelings, but it ends here. You disappoint me. This is your mother's doing. I knew I should never have left you in her care. Oh, because I'm sure you would have done a far better job. I know I would have. Because then I wouldn't have raised such a coward. And then there's you, the one known as Iron Man, Izuku Midoriya. You know, at first I didn't recognize that name, Midoriya. But then it made sense. I once knew a man named Midoriya long ago. Deku said nothing. He remained silent. Yes, I remember clearly now. It was 12 years ago, I believe. I had managed to track down one of the 10 Guardians. However, by the time we found his location, my prize was already gone. Despite everything we did, he did not break and he did not falter. Of course, your father was never much of a fighter, more so an adventurer. In the end, he knew he didn't stand a chance, but yet he tried and persisted. When I looked into his eyes, they were that of a man with no fear. To be honest, I believed he had no fear because he had nothing to lose. But that was a miscalculation on my part, was it not? Deku said nothing, but the amplification of the power ring began to manifest throughout his body. No, your father had the eyes of a man who had something to protect. And that something was you. You're the one he gave the ring to. Am I correct? I can feel its power radiating off of you. To think, your father was that foolish to to place his hopes in the hands of a child, his own son. I pity you. Truly, you have my sympathy. For what it's worth, I can say this with absolute confidence. It was never personal. Izuku's helmet, the eyes themselves glowed an ominous green. Shang, using his own chi, he could feel the killing intent oozing off of Deku. It was personal to me. Deku would go charging in at once, the repulsor rays in his feet going faster than anything Shang had ever seen. Shang had never felt Deku this angry before, but honestly, it was something that he could always sense. The death of his father, the pain that both he and his mother went through. For that moment though, Shang felt a strong sense of sadness, contempt for his father and for what he had done, the lives that he had ruined, all in his vain pursuit of power. Deku charged without hesitation and slammed right into the gut of the Mandarin. He had never seen it coming as they went crashing into a pile of rubble. Deku using the power ring to its fullest extent, the armor was barely holding on. It was starting to overload its systems. This was more power than the suit had ever managed to handle before. Deku began to rain down fists upon the Mandarin, over and over again, yelling in intense rage. To be honest, what really shocked the Mandarin was the fact that the power of only one Makuan ring was strong enough to fend off the power of 5. Although that was to be expected, the power ring fed off of pure raw emotion, and for Deku, the one that he felt now was seething, furious rage. However, the Mandarin would blast him off easily. Some of Deku's armor would go shattering in different areas, but he still stood on his feet. Deku's friends came to his rescue, Todoroki using a blast of fire and ice to send the Mandarin away, as Shang went one-on-one with his father once again. The two skilled martial artists traded strikes with one another back and forth, the battlefield rocking and shaking, as All for One was not to be left out of the equation. His arm had mutated into something monstrous, the manifestations of all of the quirks he had stored within him. Shigaraki, as well as the fellow members of the League of Villains, watched on at the carnage that was being committed. Shigaraki wanted to get involved, but before he could, Kurogiri started to take him away. Shigaraki yelled to his master. He did not want to leave him here all alone. He was willing to fight and to die here and now. However, All for One looked to his protege. He told him that now was not a place for him to die a meaningless death. He had goals and ambitions that he needed to pursue in this life. He gave him a final piece of advice. Whenever you feel that things are too much for you, whenever you feel as though you've been backed into a corner with nowhere to go, remember, you can always start again. Start again as many times as you need to. Starting again is not the mark of a failure. It is only when you give up that you have truly lost. Shigaraki reached out for his master one final time, as he and the other members of the League of Villains were warped away to safety. They had to recover from the damage they had taken fighting Deku and his friends. As they teleported to a hideout, Shigaraki had only one person on his mind, It wasn't All Might or the other heroes. It was Iron Man. He made a solemn vow. One day he would watch Iron Man decay and rot from this world. And it would be done by his hands. All Might continued to fight on with the students. All Might, Deku, Shang-Chi, Todoroki, T'Challa, Melissa, Shinso, Bakugo, and Momo. All together, they fought against the villains. As for the others, everyone watching around the world, Ida and Kirishima watching from the city not too far away, on a big screen at the happenings. Kirishima and Ida wanted to go and get involved, but they knew better. They knew that their friends had gone too far. Of course, it wasn't that they didn't want to join them, but in the end, they doubted that their assistance would really change the tide of battle. In the end, the only thing they could do was watch on and hope for the best. As the battle, the three-way, the end of everything continued. The Mandarin manifested the power of his 5 rings. Using a massive shockwave, he sent everyone flying and drawing back. All for One also was not playing fair either. Between the Mandarin and his clairvoyance, and All for One taunting All Might for the death of his master, the previous user of One for All, All Might found himself struggling to maintain his sanity. It was as if the two of them were able to draw out all of his insecurities. Everything that he buried in the darkness, they managed to dredge into the light. For All Might, he wasn't sure of how much more he could take. But the one that seemed to be the nail in the coffin was learning of Shigaraki's origin. That he was in fact the grandson of his master. Even the Mandarin was shocked at this news. And for All Might, for Gran Torino, they tried their best to fight back the truth. The idea that All for One could do something so despicable, so horrible. The Mandarin, however, even he was a bit appalled by this. Sure, he had his reasonings to do what he did, but he believed he had some form of honor. All for One, along with the Mandarin, would look to blast away All Might together. The spark of One for All was slowly fading from All Might, so much so that he had actually been reduced to a skinny form for a brief time, the world seeing him in his weakened state. However, at the last moment, as the 2 major blasts came towards his way, from out of nowhere, the others would jump in front of him. T'Challa had used the kinetic energy from all of the damage he had taken in the battle to send back a shockwave of his own, sparked with electrical energy. Melissa would shoot back her rays as well. Momo created a nanite shield. Bakugo unleashed his payload of explosions. Izuku, with the power ring, would counter their blast with one of his own. Todoroki would create a wall of fire and ice. A mixed blast. All of their combined efforts proving to be just enough to thwart the villains. However, they could feel they were at the end of their rope. Izuku looked to the others and explained that if they were going to win this, then they needed to defeat the villains in one shot. They all looked towards All Might, telling him that now was not the time to give up, that this was not where it ended for them. Even if they faced the worst of the worst. They could never give in to despair. That wasn't who they were. A hero's job is to save others with a smile on his face, to never back down against the odds, to stand for what he believes in until the end, to be number one, to know that he carries the hopes and the dreams of all who believe on his shoulders, but that's a burden that he will not shoulder alone. The children's words served as a motivation for All Might, even with the sparks of One for All fading from him. All Might believed that he still had one last smash left in him, a smash that could destroy both the Mandarin and All for One. However, even Izuku realized that All Might was going to need all the help that he could get, and the others, they came together immediately. T'Challa would use his nanite-like suit, allowing it to graft and form around All Might. He explained that the suit was made from vibranium, one of the most strongest metals on Earth. It would serve as his defense for his weak spot. Izuku would take off his gauntlet, combining it with the grenade gauntlet of Bakugo. The two metals would morph and mix together, almost like it was something they were designed to do. Izuku explained that he had a combination technique that he wanted to try with Bakugo someday, but that now wasn't really the time. As the mechanical gauntlet grew in size, All Might would place it on his right hand. Izuku would then look to his left hand, where he saw the power ring, the ring that his father fought to protect. He took it off his finger, and he placed it in one of the holders of the gauntlet. He advised for the others to do the same. T'Challa would place his ring inside of the gauntlet, along with Melissa, and Todoroki would place the final two in there as well. Izuku theorized the Mandarin had 5 rings, and now so did All Might. They told All Might that he needed to focus, Shang-Chi walking him through how to manifest the power to its fullest extent. Of course, it was rough, and even then, All Might wasn't sure if he'd be able to figure it all out. But as he felt the power course through his veins, he knew that this was all up to him. Momo, using her own power, would create a shield from her nanites, allowing for All Might to have additional protection. Since if he was about to do what she believed he was about to do, then this was going to take everything that he had. All Might looked to all of his students as they smiled, telling All Might that no matter what, they weren't going to leave here, that they were going to stand behind him till the end. As All Might clenched his fist, his body would bulk up for what would be the final time. The mechanical gauntlet on his right hand, as well as a newly enhanced suit that would serve as his protection. All Might looked to his students, and he thanked them. And now he would take their power into the battle with him, to fight for the future. The Mandarin and All for One revved themselves up as well. The Mandarin manifesting the power of the 5 rings that he had, along with his chi. All for One calling upon every quirk that he had stockpiled in his over 100 years of existence. The three major powers all began to flare at once as All Might looked towards the two villains. He told them that this would be the end, and that with this last smash, it would serve as the final attack of the hero All Might. As All Might looked to them, a glowing aura would form all around, as he could feel the embers of One for All being set aflame just this once. For just one moment, All Might would have his chance. As the two villains began to launch towards All Might would make way as he went rocketing towards them. Gearing his fist back, he ran down all 50. Alabama, Alaska, Arizona, Arkansas, California, Colorado, Connecticut, Delaware, Florida, Georgia, Hawaii, Idaho, Illinois, Indiana, Iowa, Kansas, Kentucky, Louisiana, Maine, Maryland, Massachusetts, Michigan, Minnesota, Mississippi, Missouri, Montana, Nebraska, Nevada, New Hampshire, New Jersey, New Mexico, New York, North Carolina, North Dakota, Ohio, Oklahoma, Oregon, Pennsylvania, Rhode Island, South Carolina, South Dakota, Tennessee, Texas, Utah, Vermont, Virginia, Washington, West Virginia, Wisconsin, and Wyoming. All combined, this is my greatest attack. United States of Smash. All Might launched his massive attack, powered by the 5 Makuan rings in his possession, amplifying the strength of One for All within him. All Might would collide with both the Mandarin and with All for One, the three all smashing into one another at the same time, as a massive explosion, one that could rock the very foundation of Japan, roared and reverberated all throughout the city. Izuku and the others would all take cover, waiting until the shock waves were over, the smoke reaching high into the sky above. For the people at home and everyone around the world watching, they waited in awe to see what was going to happen next. As the smoke cleared and the dust settled, the news cameras would zoom in on a single figure, one with his arm raised. As the smoke finally cleared away, they saw that it was none other than the champion All Might himself. With his fist held high, the gauntlet disintegrated, but victory was his. Everyone cheered in celebration and victory. The number one hero, All Might, had come out on top once again. As he looked over to the students, and then to the video camera that was watching, he simply pointed his finger as he looked and said, "Now, it's your turn." Izuku and the others would make their way to All Might, helping him stand on his feet, but just barely. Shang and Izuku would look on to where the Mandarin and All for One were. They lie unconscious on the ground before them. The villains who had tormented them for so long. Their reigns had now been brought to an end, and were now seemingly done and put behind them. Shang and Izuku would also look for the Makuan rings. However, when they discovered each one, it was revealed that they had all seemingly been destroyed, broken beyond repair. It seemed as though in the final clash, all of their power was used up, and in the ensuing destruction, there was nothing left. Of course, on one hand, it was a good thing. The Makuan rings were a power that no one should possess, a power too tempting. It was the reason why the 10 Guardians were assigned in the first place, because the rings were never meant to be close to one another. However, throughout mankind's history, each Mandarin that had ever existed with the sole purpose of trying to combine and have that ultimate power. For Izuku and Shang, a power that had cursed both their families was now erased off the face of the earth. And honestly, it was better off this way. Before long, paramedics and others would rush to their locations. Everyone would be taken to the hospital where they would be given a chance to recover. Of course, there was much bureaucracy, a lot of other legal issues, and everything else that had to be settled before now. In the wake of the final battle, All Might announced his retirement. The Mandarin, along with his other bases all around the world, were raided one by one. His empire crumbled and brought to the ground below, as he was imprisoned as well. In the wake of everything, Shang-Chi's mother would take over in place of the Mandarin, taking over what remained of his organization. She believed that now she could change things, bring it back to what it used to be before it was corrupted. As for Izuku and his friends, there were mixed emotions on what to do with them. On one hand, they had broken many laws. Despite the good that they had done, there were still those who believed that the kids should be punished. But there were others, the public mainly, that saw them as heroes. If it hadn't been for them standing up the way that they did, there was no telling where the world would be right now. Of course, for Mr. Aizawa, his main issue was the fact that his students had been getting involved in such shenanigans, and he was none the wiser. Deep down, a part of him knew, but at the same time, he wouldn't have believed it. Magical space rings with abilities far beyond anything he could comprehend. The idea that his students were fighting against villain warlords and others alike. There was no telling what was going to happen. Of course, for Izuku himself, his main focus was his mother. As the two of them had reconvened with one another, Izuku had to explain to her the truth. Of course, there were tears shed on both sides. Inko was worried for her son's safety, and while she admitted that she didn't want her son in this life anymore, after everything they had been through, even she was happy to see the Mandarin facing justice for what he had done to them. And she couldn't deny that she was proud of the young man that he had become. Even without a quirk, he had become his own hero. He had stood up to forces she could only dream of, and he came home safe. In the end, she couldn't have asked for more. As Izuku and the others recovered and made their way, there was a decision to be made about what they were going to do, where they were going to go. T'Challa, well, his mission was over. He had only come to UA in help of the Makuan rings. In the end, his duty was to Wakanda. He was his country's hero. And technically, he already had a pro license. This was just an undercover. So he decided he was going to go back home. As for Shang-Chi, he still had business to settle back in China. Not all of his father's agencies went down. There were still others in hiding who would look at the power vacuum and would try to take hold of it for themselves. And in the end, his gig at UA was only temporary. Although he did enjoy it for the time that he had it, and honestly he didn't want to leave. As he gave a call to his mother, she explained that she felt the same, and she wanted him to stay and get his education proper. Of course, she would hope that Shang would visit, and he indeed wanted to. She also teased him, saying that next time he should bring a cute girl along. He blushed a little at that. There was one girl in particular he thought about, as Uraraka watched him shyly from the corner side. As for Melissa, she still wanted to be a pro hero. She was already enrolled in UA's hero course, although she was a few years older than them, so technically speaking, she was already with the third years in terms of her education, since she transferred from Island's Academy to UA. Of course, she would have to work closely with the support course as well, since she was a hero without a quirk, same as Izuku. This left a spot open in Class 1A, and after seeing what he was capable of, Mr. Aizawa decided that Shinso would take that spot, although Shinso wasn't going to be slacking off. He was going to continue working with his bow and arrows, as he felt as though there were a lot of usage he could use for them. And also, Mr. Aizawa wanted to take the young boy under his wing, as he saw a lot of potential in him as a hero, and felt he could teach him a thing or two. Eventually, the time would come when goodbyes would be in order. As they made their way to Tokyo Airport, Izuku, along with Bakugo and Momo, were looking to say goodbye. T'Challa was making his way back home to Wakanda. And as for Shang-Chi, he was going to visit his mother, but he promised he'd be back in time for school, as UA had closed down for the month, as there were a lot of things that were going to need to be taken care of before class could resume. So that would give him enough time to get his affairs in order, visit the family, settle some things. Izuku and Shang would shake hands. A little over a year ago, their journey as heroes began together. Of course, they had no idea what the future held for them. There was also T'Challa. Despite not being there for long, he considered everyone a close ally and a friend. And if they ever needed the help of the Black Panther, they only need but call. And besides, he liked the idea of teaming up from time to time. Maybe they could do it again someday. With that, T'Challa would board his private jet and would make his way back to his homeland. And Shang-Chi would make his way home as well. Bakugo, Momo, and Izuku would then leave the airport. Bakugo had more ideas for his War Machine armor and what he wanted to do with it. Momo had also been thinking of ways to improve with One for All, and she looked forward to seeing where she could take her limits to next, hoping that someday she could get on the level of All Might. And as for Izuku, he simply smiled as he thought to himself, thinking of how his journey to be the #1 hero was still before him. Even if he didn't have a quirk, he was still going to be #1. Even without the power ring, it changed nothing for him. In the end, he was more than just a suit of armor, than a magical ring, or a quirk or lack thereof. And he had the utmost confidence within himself. As the three were making their way out of the airport, they would be stopped, however. There was a man sitting at a table drinking coffee, looking out the window. He had long black hair. He was dressed in a brown suit. He wore a jacket of similar color that bore 3 letters. The letters being TVA. As they walked past, he commented to Izuku that he had been very impressive. He was surprised. Izuku and the others turned as they faced him. He smiled. "So, you are the invincible Iron Man, Izuku Midoriya." "Yeah? Who are you?" "I go by many names, but you can call me Loki. Pleasure to make your acquaintance." The 3 looked at him nervously as he stood and reached out his hand. Izuku, however, confidently shook it back. "So, Loki, if I have that right, what exactly can I do for you?" "I'm putting together a team, if you will. Although this world is a bit different, it's a team you'll be familiar with soon enough. Tell me, have you ever heard of the Avengers?" And this concludes What If Deku Was Iron Man? My Hero Academia Armored Adventures, Part 9, the finale. Thank you for enjoying this series, and if you like this and other videos that we have on the channel, then please don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, share, and hit that bell for post notifications so you can stay up to date on everything that is PowerCore Productions and Podcastings that has to come out now and in the future. Stay tuned for tomorrow's video as we continue What If Bel Crunel Was Thor? Don Machi, The Last King, Season 3, Part 1. With that, that's going to bring an end to today's video. I'm Javon Harrington with PowerCore Productions and Podcastings, signing off, and I'll see you next time.